So I'm going to give it like a minute or two to see if we get more people in here or if anybody comes in. And then I'm going to talk primarily, as usual, to be honest with you, about toxic parenting, what that means, how it plays out. And today I want to try, if I can, in the sort of 20 minutes that I'm going to be here, to have a little bit of a focus on healing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about forgiveness, because it's something that always comes up when I talk about this. So I'll probably start there in a second and then see where we go with it for the 20 minutes that I'm going to be here. So yeah, let's see what happens. Okay, there's a few people in here now. Look, obviously with a lot of the content that I put out, it's all based around, or a lot of it is based around toxic parenting nowadays. And a couple of people are already talking about it there, right, which is good to see. But I wanted to start at this place of forgiveness. So a lot of people ask me what my thoughts are and what my views are in terms of forgiving, particularly like a parent that has abused you, right? And there's a few things that I think get left out when the forgiveness question is sort of brought up. The first thing that I would say about forgiveness, and this is not true of all forgiveness, but I think it's worth saying, forgiveness sometimes, I think, gets put across as this kind of virtue. It gets put across as, like, if you're spiritual enough and doing the work well enough, then you'll reach this place where you can just forgive and, you know, let go of all of the, you know, hate or any of the kind of struggle that you have towards the person that's hurt you. And sometimes I do think it's more of a virtue signal than an actual truth. What I mean by that is I think that people say it, though deep down it's probably not actually the reality for them. And so I think we have to be really, really careful about that, right? Then I would always go to, what do we mean when we say forgiveness, right? When we say, should we forgive a toxic parent, or can we ever forgive them, or is it essential? What do we mean by forgiveness? Now, a lot of people will say forgiveness is not about letting them off the hook. It's more about freeing yourself from the prison of being affected by what they did to you. And if we're talking about that, then I understand that, right? I sort of understand that might be a reality that we want to reach. But I sort of look at it and say, ultimately, I don't think forgiveness is the only way to free yourself from the bondage of what you might experience if you've experienced, like, what it is to have had a toxic parent, right? So I do believe, somebody said, I believe forgiveness comes automatically once we decide not to be their victim anymore. Yeah, and look, I guess then you could call that forgiveness, right? When you sort of stop allowing them to hurt you in that way, and you kind of move on. If that's what we're calling forgiveness, then I understand that. However, what I would say, and let me say this about it, if the parent is still alive, right, and is popping up in your life randomly all of the time, be it like a text message out of the blue, I've talked about the cryptic text messages that come through, or it's you bumped into somebody that knows you and knows the parent, and that somebody mentions something that the parent said and it's clearly not truth and it's not real, then I don't think, how can you forgive somebody that is still repeatedly hurting you in that way? How can you forgive somebody that is still essentially abusing you, even if it is from afar? Yeah, I don't necessarily think that's as easy. And then so what you have to kind of do then, someone's trying to join, decline. Then what you have to do then, for me, really, is I think you almost have to cast it aside and concentrate on yourself. Now, some people would call that forgiveness. I don't know if necessarily I would call it that. Someone says sometimes clear healthy boundaries are what's needed and forgive ourselves. Yeah, I understand that. I think that's probably true. The thing about boundaries that I would say as well also is that you can have the best boundaries in the world, but if you're dealing with somebody who's like really toxic, they'll come under those boundaries or around them, right? Or they'll make those boundaries less powerful and they'll find a way. So boundaries can be really good, and I think we have to be careful not to shame those who struggle to implement boundaries against somebody who is highly abusive. Yeah, because again, what I think sometimes happens online is we create these ideals, and then people like polarize them, and then they make them like the perfect ideals, and then you have somebody who talks about like the perfect boundaries. Then you get into the realms of saying to somebody, you know, if you're being abused in any way, then it's your fault, right? Because you're not implementing good enough boundaries. So like, I do think that we have a responsibility to create and implement boundaries for ourselves. I advocate for that. I have an online breathwork session coming up, actually, that is built around boundaries. And I think we should also always highlight that it's not necessarily always an easy reality. So yeah, look, someone's talking about passive aggressiveness here as well. And I think the thing about the passive aggressiveness, yeah, is that often at the heart of passive aggressiveness is that push to get a reaction from you, so that when you then do react, right, and you will react more externally, so you won't do it passively, right? And then you get that, oh, whoa, look, what, why are you acting crazy? Like, I didn't even do anything. And you have to learn, by the way, when you've grown up around somebody that's like that, you have to learn, or you've lived any period of time with somebody like that's like that, right? You have to learn to trust yourself again in terms of when you notice somebody saying something, because these toxic people, they'll know, because they're highly sensitive, right, normally, so they're really often quite in tune with what's going on, which means that they can manipulate you really well, because they can do a subtle change in the way that they're talking, or literally change the way that they deliver one word, right? And it's enough to know that they're being passive aggressive, and you pick up on it. But when you do, you have your reality denied, and you're made to feel like you're crazy because you've picked up on it, and it's made you angry, or it's made you defensive, right? And so when you come away from that, you learn, particularly if you've grown up your whole life around it, then you learn not to trust yourself, right? And you learn not to you learn to question your reality all of the time. You don't trust yourself, your body, and the things that you pick up on. So when you come away from that relationship, one of the first things that you have to do is realign yourself, is to come back into your body, to understand yourself and what you're thinking and feeling, and recognize that it is true. Because you will be very good at picking up on those subtle changes, but you would have been made to feel like you're crazy all of the time. I've not long cut ties with parents, and it hurts like hell still. Does it get easier? Look, I would encourage you to go and look at a lot of the comments on here, in terms of my content that I put out. There's lots of people on there that talk about like complete freedom and stuff from it. But I think it's hard. I think it's horrible. Because look, let me say this about parents, right? This is what I don't think people understand. Attaching to your parents or primary caregivers in those first initial years is not like a desire, it's a biological human need. So we're wired to do that. We're wired to connect to them. Why? Because we're completely dependent upon them in those initial years, more so than any other animal, or most other animals, because our brains are so underdeveloped when we're born. We can't walk, we can't do anything. So we need to attach to them, right? They're like gods to us. They are gods, right? They're everything to us. And then what happens is over those initial first few years, then we should be able to kind of detach from them and understand and learn our autonomy and be supported in that, right? If you grew up with a toxic parent, then you wouldn't have done any of that. So you'd be quite enmeshed with them and like quite emotionally responsible for them, because that's what they would have done. And then you'll be in this constant fight often in your adulthood, trying to do that kind of detaching that should have happened when you were younger, but didn't, because you had a parent who made themselves the center of the world rather than making you the center of the world, which is what you should have been in those initial years to kind of learn who you are. Yeah. Keep these questions coming in, because I will... see, look, somebody said here, I'm no contact with my dad almost 10 years now, and it's such a relief. So that'll be good for some people to read. I wanted to talk a little bit about like healing today as well, and like where do you start to heal if you've been you know, if you've had that relationship with a toxic parent, then you've probably grown up in that environment. And like, there's a lot of talk online. I'm going to come to that question in a minute. There's a lot of talk online about healing now. It's quite like a sort of buzzword. And I think you sort of have to be careful that this healing work doesn't replace what we would call self-development, right? If you've been, if you've grown up in a difficult environment, right, a lot of what you're reacting to is not necessarily that you need to develop yourself or that you need to become better, right? Actually, it's more about coming back to yourself and finding out who you really were and really are, and how you got so lost based on the environment that you lived in. Let me just answer this question. She tells me she feels abandoned. How do I make her not feel that way? Look, if that's a parent telling you that they feel abandoned, then it's not your duty to not make them feel that. If you've had to cut ties because of what you're experiencing, then the fact that they feel abandoned is their fault, right? Because you didn't want to abandon them. I do feel relief and freedom, but also abandoned and guilty. It's strange. Look, I would really say that that's not strange at all. I would say that's a pretty normal reaction to what you're experiencing. Yeah, you've been forced to cut ties with somebody who should be making you feel safe and protected throughout your whole life. You've had to cut ties, and of course you feel abandoned and you feel a sense of guilt. That would make sense. My younger siblings are caught in the middle. Let's talk a little bit about siblings, right? Because that can be hard for some people, because they see their siblings, like they may have cut ties, and then cutting ties may mean that their relationship with their siblings gets put under strain, and then they look at their siblings, and their siblings, you might have siblings who say, you know, I don't know why you keep saying that they're toxic or that you have to cut them out, because, you know, I never experienced that. They've always been amazing and stuff like that. One of the worst things that toxic parents do is that one of the ways of abusing you is to like really treat one sibling, particularly normally one sibling, but sometimes it's one or two, but particularly one sibling that they just treat amazingly. They treat way better than everybody else. And so this sibling only ever really experiences the parent being nice. Now, what I would say for that sibling, though they might not ever realize it, is that that's a lot of pressure for them as well. So they are actually still being abused themselves, although they may never ever mention it. And probably never ever mention it. They may never realize it. And that's probably one of the worst things in all of this. Somebody says divide and rule gives strength to the perp. So to move through with dialogue, open and no blaming. Yeah, exactly. So they do the divide and conquer, right? And common punishments that are given out by these kind of parents, particularly to children when they're younger children, will involve another sibling. So it will be things like telling, you know, a certain sibling that you can't talk to this sibling because they've been naughty. So they'll be like ostracized and really used against one another. And they'll be made, you know, there'll be always this way of getting control from the parent is to make all of the children, all of the siblings be walking on eggshells, right? So that they're always, if they know anything, they will ship their sibling in, because that's their only chance of survival within that system that they're living in, right? So they will always put their parent first, and that's one of the toxic, sort of narcissistic, abusive ways that the parent will operate to keep themselves at the center. Yeah, and I think a lot of people that see my stuff and follow my stuff will be dealing with parents who are narcissistic, right? And I know a lot of people say that you shouldn't, if you're not a professional, you shouldn't say narcissistic. But I think, look, if you've experienced it, then you know exactly what you're talking about. And often people are, the parents that we're talking about here are covert. What I mean by covert is that they make themselves the center of the universe by always making sure that they're the victim. Yeah, and they do that in a number of ways. And if you're a child that's cut them off, then, you know, you just become another suitable way of them saying to the world, you know, making sure that everybody keeps them at the center, because you've cut them out. Yeah, so everybody, you know, they'll tell all the people around them, my kids have cut me out, and I raised them all myself, and everything I did, and then that helps them to keep them at the center of their world. So people often see narcissistic people as like people who are like, you know, I'm the best, everybody should bow down at my feet. What we're often talking about here is that covert, yeah. I am the victim, I'm the center of the world, I'm the center of the universe, because I've only ever done my best and everybody around me has wronged me. And so, you know, children you're going to experience that. And you're going to experience when they cut you off, they're going to go about telling everybody how hard it has been for them and how horrible it has been for them. And that's horrible. That's really, really hard. I've only got like 5 minutes left here, so I did want to talk a little bit about healing and what healing might look like. I think if you've grown up with this all of your life, which you probably have if you've got a toxic parent, though you might not have known it when you was a child, one of the first things that you need to do is to be able to build back a relationship. I'll talk about triggers in a second. Is to build back a relationship with yourself and your body, because when you were a child, you will have constantly had your reality denied. So anything that you felt in yourself that was correct, if you brought it forward, you would have been made to feel like you're crazy. So that passive aggressiveness that you might have experienced, right, or that kind of questioning of your reality when you were a child would have meant that you will have disconnected from your body and not trusted it, because that's the only way you would have survived. Because how you were surviving was to be able to attach to somebody who was hell-bent on being the center of the universe, right? So you couldn't be with your body. So a big part of healing is about coming back into our bodies and starting to trust it again and learning how to feel and what certain feelings feel like, connecting back to that intuition, because your intuition is so important. That kind of gut feeling, and again, as children and as a child, you'd have had that gut feeling disconnected, right? Because that toxic person that needed to be the center of the universe would have felt exposed consistently and regularly by your intuition. So you would have learned that if I want to be in this relationship, if I want to be in this family system that I exist in, I need to disconnect from my body. Although that's not a conscious thing, right? So a lot of the healing is coming back into the body, and learning to trust that again, learning to kind of love your body again. And to do that, there's two key things that come to me straight away. The first one is like learning to love it through exercises, right? And I do a lot of that work myself. But the second one is, and this goes against a lot of the things that you see online, a lot of the kind of spiritual healing stuff that you see online is all about finding gratitude and finding love and finding peace and all of that stuff. That might be useful, and I'm not saying people shouldn't do that, but if you've grown up in this kind of toxic environment, then actually love and gratitude and all of that, you would have had to find toxic levels of that, right? Because you'd have had to give that to somebody who was giving you nothing back and actually was making you feel worse all of the time, right? So actually a lot of the work is not necessarily about finding love and finding gratitude like we might see and like might be suggested to us repeatedly. It's about the opposite, being able to be angry, right? Being able to have my anger, being allowed to be angry, being allowed to have my very normal and appropriate reactions to what I was experiencing. So actually, rather than looking for gratitude all of the time, actually creating spaces where you can feel ungrateful. And you can say, when I was a child, I went through this and I experienced that, and that was shit. And there's nothing else to it. And I don't have to try and make sense of it and wrap it up in a nice bow. That was shit. And it was shit because I had a toxic parent who made it shit. And there's no way of making that good. Yeah. And I think for me, some of that is really, really important, and we see the opposite being fed to us online all of the time. Yeah. Be grateful. Always look for the good in everything. And look, again, those things are important unless you've had a life that has forced you to do those things at the expense of what you're truly feeling. And it's not as popular. Doesn't go down as well, and it might not make you look and seem like some sort of spiritual god or goddess, but I think it's the reality. How do you move on knowing that you're never going to get an apology? You have to look. How do you move on knowing you're never going to get an apology? Look, I think the answer is that you should have been the center of the universe when you were younger, right? You should have been, when a child is born, they're supposed to have their value in them shown and nurtured and loved, so that you can go out into the world and be the version of yourself that you were supposed to be and make meaningful connections and bonds as a result of that. Yeah. So I actually think, knowing that you're never going to get an apology, I think the best thing that you can do, or the best place that you could start, is to find ways to make yourself the center of the universe again and start to reparent yourself in that way. What I would say is that, and I think we're supposed to live like this as humans, is you can find mothering figures, you can find fathering figures, you can build your own community, your own tribe of people where you have all of these figures in your life. You can get mothering figures in your life, you can get fathering figures in your life, and there's lots of different ways to do this. The fact that somebody born you, is that the right way of putting it? But the fact that somebody, was your birth parent doesn't mean that they're the only mum or dad that you can get. We can go out and find those other figures. And let me highlight again, it's not going to be easy, and it's horrible because it's not supposed to be this way. So allow yourself to be upset and know that, don't put time limits on this stuff. You never asked for this. Don't think that you should reach a stage of your life where you're just never affected by the fact that they'll never apologize to you and they'll never see it from your way. Don't put yourself under pressure to reach a place where that, just goes away, because I think it's unrealistic. And actually you're finding ways to live with it, so that you can enjoy the moments of freedom that do come. Kelly, hello. Good to see you. I feel like I'm in my body, but hold resentment for it because I suck at being me. Look, I would really encourage you to come and try one of my breathwork things. I do free ones sort of every 2 or 3 months, but I have like an online space as well where I'm doing them 2 or 3 times a month. And then I start my 6-week program in January. Look, I would really encourage you to come and try and do that. I don't want to kind of self-promote my program because it feels unfair to do that in a space like this. But I would encourage you to look at it and maybe try it in January. The process that I take you on the 6 weeks is to learn who you are and who you've become in the world today, look at your past relationships, the impact that they've had on you, and then go back and get your inner child. And by the time that you've done 4 weeks of work around it, you'll go back and get them, and it'll feel safe and you can become their champion. And that's the kind of work that I do on there. So I would say that you will love the breath workshop of Chocolates. It's amazing and profound experience. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, look, it's 2 o'clock. I've got to shut this down. And I've got to preserve my chest. I've had a bad chest for a couple of days now, so I'm trying to look after it a little bit. We'll do more. It looks like the forgiveness stuff has resonated. And look, what I say about everything that I talk about is that there's no definitive right or wrong answers here. It's just about exploring it with a curiosity to see what it all means to us and our own experiences. I'll do another one of these probably next week, and I'll see you all then.